Welcome to the Ogles channel. Thanks for watching today. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're actually going to do a book review of a book called A Movie Making Nerd by James Rolfe, or most of you know him more as the Angry Video Game Nerd. And truth be told, that's where I came across him like 10 or so years ago, or I guess more than 10 years at this point. But regardless, he was like one of the original YouTubers out there, especially one that like did like game reviews and whatnot, and especially one that did like retro game reviews. He was a pioneer in his field, truth be told. But as the years have gone by, like I still watched all the new episodes of Angry Video Game Nerd that come out, but I find myself more interested like when James just sort of gets on camera and talks about like his favorite movie scenes or his favorite movie intros or just favorite horror movies or favorite cartoons or just like nostalgia stuff. I mean, James does a fantastic job of just being a calm, mild-mannered, I guess, internet friend to a degree. Someone you just sort of sit back, listen to, and relive a lot of the memories with him as he's going through this. And that's exactly like how this book reads to me. I mean, it's not like some great literary work where you're like, man, the sentence structure and syntax and all this is fantastic. It's just going to feel like somebody talking to you. I mean, that's exactly how he wrote the book, as if he's just having a conversation with you. You can like literally hear his voice in your head as you're listening to it because you're so accustomed to James's voice that it just fits perfectly. I mean, his tone is matched perfect word for word of how he talks in person. And some people would call that a flaw as far as like, you know, he didn't elevate his reading or his writing for the book. But to me, I actually find that a plus because it made it more personal. And that's how I sort of view James at this point, is sort of on a personal basis. Obviously, I don't know the guy at all, but through his videos, you sort of feel like you know him, especially more of the talking videos instead of the Angry Video Game Nerd. And to me, this book really even doesn't even focus a whole lot on the Angry Video Game Nerd. Obviously, he's mentioned in there and does a great deal about the movie especially. But as far as like the founding of the series and like all the seasons it went through, that's sort of glossed over throughout the book. You're going to get more stuff about his childhood, his special education school, his college days, his post-college, the making of the movie, as well as a great insight into his family as well. And it's overall a great book, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. But we're just sort of going to do a breakdown of sort of piece by piece of the book. There will be some spoilers in this, so if like you want to read the book and you don't want to hear any of my thoughts about the book before you read it, you can stop the video now and just sort of know it's a enjoyable read. If you enjoy filmmaking or if you enjoy James as a person, I think you'll have a great time with the book. But if you don't want any spoilers, feel free to stop the video now before I jump into like, I guess sort of point by point and sort of my feelings about it as we go. And I guess if you're still sticking around at this point, either you've already read the book or you don't mind some spoilers, so let's go ahead and jump into it here. Now the book begins all the way back in his early childhood, which shouldn't come as a surprise. I mean, it's an autobiography, so it's going to cover his entire life up until the age he's at now. But it starts back in his early childhood. It's just interesting like how relatable James is all the way back to when he was a little kid, because so many things that he describes, like I can relate to that when I was a child of that age. And I feel like a lot of readers can as well, especially when it comes to like his imagination that he had, or the nightmares that he had, or the creativity or the adventures that he would have. And he really focuses on one specific one in particular. And he focuses on this dragon or this Loch Ness monster type creature at the park. And he shows a picture of it in the book as well. And it's just really interesting like how it captivated him to such a large degree. He'd have nightmares about it. He'd have adventures about it. He would have, you know, his imagination stories about it. And I think all of us as kids had something, you know, either in our backyard or at the park, where we'd imagine a full, you know, lore behind it and have full adventures about it, draw pictures about it at school. I mean, he really like captures what it's like to be an imaginative kid. He does a really good job of that. I mean, he even described at one point in the book about how him and his friends try to dig like a hole to Satan or dig a hole to hell. And it's just weird when I read that, because I remember when I was in first grade, me and my friends, like we tried to do the exact same thing. And that turned into like a literal disaster. I mean, like we obviously didn't dig a hole all the way to hell or anything. But I mean, it turned into a literal disaster as far as like the arguments that developed between us. But that's a different story for a different day. But just amazing how relatable he is as a kid to my own personal childhood. And I feel like a lot of people's personal childhood as they're reading through the book. But the one step different that James took than I, and I think a lot of kids, is he actually took his adventures into like trying to turn them into full stories and eventually into movies, which is what we're watching a lot of times when we watch this channel. Because as a kid, at first he didn't have a video camera. He would take photos of his adventures or, you know, of all these different things around, and he would paste them in a book and he would write captions below it, almost like a comic book. So he was making his own comic books in order to tell his stories. As he grew older, he eventually got like a cassette recorder and started audio recording, almost like a radio broadcast of a show. But his family does eventually get a camera recorder, and he can start finally filming these stories, filming these adventures, and bringing his imagination to life on the film medium, which is what he wanted to do all along. And he does call all of these early projects films inside the book. And I know it does sound a little odd to call them films, but I think he's just calling it that by name because he acknowledges they're very raw, they're very unscripted, they're very much of a home project, and he does say they're pretty crappy on the early end. But it is interesting like how seriously he takes himself even from the beginning, and I think that's something that like is admirable about James. And I think anybody who's in the creative business looks back over their history and they can see that things that they were so proud of are crappier, but they're still proud of that because it led them to the journey they're on now. And so I can see him still wanting to call these films or these videos films because he's proud of that, and it led him to where he's at now. But I do love that he is so dedicated to his dream here, and he is so dedicated to his passion. And he's truly worked like passion projects. I mean, he put everything he had into them. Like I said, they were sort of home video, crappier films, but at the same time, he did everything he could to make them as good as possible. He had 2 VCRs set up for the best editing that he could possibly do. Instead of doing credits, because he had no ability to roll credits at a screen or on the film, he'd actually like set up little note cards around the environment and film all the note cards as he's going for directed by, written by, starring, and get all the little credits in there. And eventually got to the point where he could actually overlay it on the screen, got to the point where he could actually like draw little drawings on the overlay as well, fight against them. It's just really fascinating like how far advanced he came as a kid in his films. Before he got into like actual filmmaking as it goes. But it's also in his early stage of filmmaking, he realizes the struggles that go along with it. And there's a lot of struggles in James's life, and the book really deals with like how does he deal with the struggles that are presented to him. And one of the very first struggles that he deals with is when he's making these movies, he realizes that his friends aren't as passionate as he is about it. And that's difficult for anybody to go through. When you want to really accomplish something and you have your mind and your heart set on something, and the people you're working with just simply don't want to be there or just simply don't share that same passion as you do. And when it came to James's case, he wanted his actors in these videos to take it more seriously. He wanted to learn the script. He wanted to learn the dialogue. He wanted to show up on time. He wanted to just simply show up at all. He wanted them to wear the same clothes they wore last time, to have the continuity. All these things are very important to James, and to make a movie, they are important. But as kids, most kids don't view it as important when it's just simply a fun project for them. And so it really shows like the drive that James had early in his childhood to accomplish this film career. Even though he may not have known what it meant to be a full filmmaker or a full director or anything like that as a kid, he still wanted to pursue the dream of bringing his imagination and his stories to life the best that he could. And it's just really an awesome little childhood that he describes when he's pursuing these filmmaking or these early films for himself. But the book doesn't just simply focus on just the filmmaking side of James. It also focuses a little bit on the education side of James and some of his emotional struggles that he had even as a kid. Because as a kid, he did have to go to a special education school. And he's never really talked about a lot about this on the channel, but he does go through a really good bit in the book here. And it sounds more along the lines like a behavior mod school, if you ask me. Because if you're looking at like the kids inside that school didn't seem to have a lot of cognitive impairment. They seemed more like almost all the kids just simply dealt with extreme discipline issues or like acting out and not knowing how to control their anger. And that seems to be the reason that James ended up there more as well. Maybe a little bit on the autistic spectrum as well, because things like, loud noises did bother him a lot. And there are just a few little things that seem to pick up on like the spectrum, at least for James. But it seemed like he was mainly there for I think behavior reasons. But it's interesting that he like chose to go into so much detail on like how he acted as a kid and not like hold anything back. It's a very vulnerable picture of him here, because it talks about like how he would throw temper tantrums before he went to the alternative school, or I'm sorry, the special ed school, and talks about how he like purposely wet his pants to get out of things and start fights and arguments. And I mean, it's just a very vulnerable picture that I never really thought he'd put all that into writing for us here. James is a very reserved person, and this is very much bearing his soul a little bit inside the book here, as far as like saying, hey, these are the struggles that I had. I worked through them, but these are some pretty hefty struggles. And so you had the creative side of James, who's working on all these films, but then you had the school and emotional side of James that really wasn't able to handle the normal day-to-day social life. And I think those really do cross a lot as the book's going to continue on as well. But eventually James gets to the age where he's ready to start high school, and at this point he doesn't want to be at the special ed school anymore. He actually requests to leave the school. He does have one massive meltdown before he leaves the school, and it seemed to be more of the bus driver's fault as far as like saying something really rude to James. It made him act out, and it almost came down to he almost didn't get to leave the special ed school because of the anger outburst, and that would have made a massive difference on his life on the path. And it sort of goes to show there's a lot of instances in this book where James has an outburst or makes a mistake of some sort that tends to almost derail the entire thing, but then ends up straightening its ship back out. I will say James always, despite having bad luck in instances, things tend to work out for James in the long run. But he does start high school here, and of course he's going to be a little bit on the socially awkward side. I mean, he's coming from a special ed school, small class sizes, individual attention, journeying over to a high school, large class sizes, very little individual attention. I mean, it's really one extreme to the other, but I feel like he handles the transition really well. I mean, he's still going to be that little nerdy kid who's socially awkward, but at the same time, his films that he makes, it begins to actually get him some attention. He begins to make friends with like some of the popular kids, some of the athletic kids, because they want to be in his films. I mean, he starts the 6 Snicks films that are out there. I mean, you can look them up on YouTube. I mean, you can watch them. They're amateur films, but he's actually pulling in more of an audience, more of friends to work on these films, and he's becoming more and more of the filmmaker that he wants to be. And he even talks about at one point how he, in his high school years, he has a little mustache that he had because it made him feel, sort of like a director to a degree. And he acknowledges it was probably dumb looking now, but at the time he was so proud of it. And I get that. I think like when most people figure out like what their passion is or their drive or what they want to be when they grow up, they begin to imitate the styles a little bit. To sort of feel like you're already part of that community. And so, I mean, yeah, his mustache, I mean, it sort of looks dumb in hindsight. He, like I said, he admits that. But at the time, like, I understand wanting to do things to feel like you're part of that community that you're striving so hard for. But once again, the book doesn't just simply focus on the filmmaking side of James. It also goes into the personal, emotional side as well. Like he talked about when he got his first car, which led to having to get his first job, which he absolutely hated. He called it it was a place that he called Shit Mart, which I think we can all relate to and have a job that we would feel comfortable calling it that as well. It also talked about the first dates he went on. We went to prom, had some backseat adventures. Was it a date? Was it not a date? I mean, a lot of, the normal teenage confusion there. But the high school years is also where he discovered another core part of his personality here, which is going to be music. And in particular, metal music, and in one of his favorite bands, Metallica. And it talks about his first concert experience where he actually went to see Metallica live. He describes it almost like a religious awakening for him. He's never been a really religious fella, he talks about in the book, but he said music was like a religion to him. And when he went there and everyone was chanting all together, for these songs and whatnot, he truly felt like it was a religious awakening, and he began to search music out more and more. And that really became like a core part of his personality because, I mean, look where he's at now. He's working with that Rex Viper band. And I know that's not like everyone's cup of tea. I know some people don't really care for James's adventure in this, but I mean, James loves metal music. He loves performing. So, I mean, more power to it. But overall, the high school years tend to be pretty formative years for James as far as like continuing his filmmaking, working on some films he actually wanted to work on, some that he still holds in high regards. I mean, the head incident was done in high school as well. And then he also discovered music here and really sort of discovered his path in life, which led him to really want to be a filmmaker. So, of course, naturally, he's going to go to college to be a filmmaker. And he applies to college. He gets accepted into college. He goes his first year at college. And there's really no better way to describe his first year at college than just a pure shit show. I mean, it is a disaster from start to finish of his college freshman year in college, because he goes to college and he doesn't really like the classes that he's in a whole lot. I mean, they're mostly gen ed classes, and that's everyone's college experience. And he gets stuck in a dormitory with these roommates who are like the total opposite of James's personality. And they are very destructive. They punch holes in the wall. They set things on fire in the apartment. They break fan blades off. I mean, they're not supposed to go out on the balcony. They go on the balcony. They, they do drugs on the balcony. I mean, they drink on the balcony or they smoke on the balcony. They do everything that's opposite of James's personality is pretty much happening in this apartment. And you really get to see the side of James as very like standoffish, like, I'm not supposed to go on the balcony. That's a rule. I'm not going to go on the balcony. I can't do it. Or, I'm not supposed to smoke. I can't smoke. I can't do it. Or there's all these things about James, like, he just does not want to engage in anything that's possibly questionable. And James, noticing the discretion between the two, obviously didn't want to participate, but at the same time, he felt that he should film and document this era of his life. And he obviously had some sort of close bond or affinity for his roommates as well. And he filmed a lot of the bad things that they did in college, as far as, the destruction of the dormitory. And after he got out of his freshman year, they all moved out, and he got called down to the dean a few times as far as, asking about some of the controversies that were going on. They were able to, excuse most of it. But after his freshman year, he went home and he edited a film basically documenting all the destructive practices that him and his roommates had done at college. And he sent it out to all his, college friends with the Fight for Your Right to Party by the Beastie Boys in the background. And there were a lot of very incriminating things said on the tape. And James even participated at one part on the tape. Even though he didn't do any of the violence, he basically said on the tape, fuck this school or something like that. And when he said that, like, he was acting as a character, but he still put in the video. And when the video got into the hands of the dean, which no one still to this day knows how it happened, he saw all of this and he went through it. And he called all the roommates in, including James, and expelled them from the school. And when James got the letter that he was expelled, like this, like destroyed James. I mean, it sunk him down so low that James basically tried to end himself at one point. And it's just a very, very dark time for James when all this happens. And obviously, when it does happen, he has to come clean to his parents, the community, everyone around him, what happened at that dormitory. And no one could believe that James was part of something like that. And he really wasn't part of it, but he did document it, and he came off as a contributor to it. But regardless, the dean actually knew him a little bit as far as like being not quite like the rest of the roommates, allowed him to meet with him, and at that point they allowed James to be suspended for 1 year and then come back to school after that. And that was sort of like the saving grace of James here. He finally got to pursue his career again. And it almost reminded me once, like sort of like when he was going from the special ed school to the high school. He had one massive outburst that almost kept him at that special ed school, but they saw leniency because they saw promise in him, and they let him continue on to high school. Here, very similar circumstance. He had a massive outburst of sorts by making this film, almost didn't get to continue film school, and of course they saw some promise in him, so it allowed him to continue anyway. This is like a huge deal to James. I mean, it takes up like a solid, I'd say a quarter of the book, maybe a third of the book. I mean, it's a lot where he talks about his college experience and the whole details of like getting expelled and what it did to his emotional side. I mean, while he's writing all this, his filmmaking tends to take a little bit of background, but I mean, it really gives a lot of perspective into how much James cared about his dream and how much it affected him when he possibly saw it falling apart. But James does get to start college back again, and the book actually picks up pace a great bit here as far as like going through years very fast, because it goes through his college years really quickly, where he meets Mike and Bootsy and Justin, which are obviously huge deals within the AVGN universe there. And he meets them, actually, gets into playing some old games with them, just becoming real good, close friends with them, even roommates with Justin at one point. But goes through all that, goes through his college years, talks about some of the films that he made. Nothing like of huge significance on that as far as like details on them. There's one where he talks about like blue sky or blue lake or blue ocean or blue something. It's like this mystery he investigated for his senior project, and it does give some details on that. And it's probably a pretty interesting film. And it talks about like his indie film festivals that he would create at the school to do. And he really gets to sort of see the reaction of people for the first time appreciating his art, which is a huge deal to him. I mean, being able to say, hey, my films aren't just showed to friends and families. Now people out in the world are enjoying my films. And it really encourages him to continue as a filmmaker. Now, when he gets out of college, it's like reality hits him a little bit, because he gets out of college and all of a sudden he's lost his audience for his films. He doesn't know who to show his films to anymore, really. He starts drinking a lot. He gets a job that he hates with this basically making like informative videos. Doesn't enjoy that a whole lot. Things seem to be not going real well for him again. And at this point, he begins just sort of making short videos for fun like he used to. And one of the videos that he happened to make was like bad NES games. And he showed it to Mike and Bootsy, and they laughed, they loved it, and they encouraged him to make more of that. And of course, that is the beginning of the Angry Video Game Nerd. And he really goes through the Angry Video Game Nerd years very fast as far as like going through. He doesn't really talk about hardly any of the actual videos of the Angry Video Game Nerd. He just simply talks about some of the fame that came along with it and the fans. And he talks about how this leads him into the life he wants to lead of being a filmmaker. And I think it's fairly obvious in this book, and I could be wrong, but I think it's fairly obvious that James never really wanted to do AVGN as like a full-time job. I think James really wanted to make films, and the nerd character was just simply a character of films he wanted to make, but it caught on, and he realized that if he wanted to make films, this is a way to make money on the films, and this is my way of venting my creativity or getting my creativity out while still appeasing people, making money, and gaining the attention that he wanted. And so I think the nerd was a means to an end while still carrying on his passion at the same time. But I don't think he wanted to only make nerd films, because it transitions from here over to when he got famous enough that he begins to raise money for a movie. And I feel like he wanted to make a movie on his own that was a mix of like sci-fi, horror, action, just B-movie type footage. I mean, he really wanted to make that movie, but he knew his claim to fame was the nerd character. and he knew that in order to get the support, he'd have to sort of combine those two. And I think that's what the Angry Video Game Nerd movie really is. It's a combination of the movie that James wanted to make with the movie that he knew he could attract an audience with. And I think it's just sort of a mishmash of a couple different things. And I think James will always love this movie. And that's more than a lot of creators can say. A lot of creators create something, they see the feedback wasn't that great, and they sort of disown it. I think James truly does love the Angry Video Game Nerd movie. And I find that admirable. It wasn't my personal favorite thing James has ever done, but I love the idea that he loves it because he can look at it, he can see the journey behind it, and he can see that he sort of did everything that he wanted to in one movie. But that's not to say there was not a lot of hardship to get that movie made. This book really goes into the personal toll that it took on James to make this movie. I mean, he went through, basically tried to get some like companies to sponsor it. They didn't want to sponsor it, went to Kickstarter, raised all this money for it, but then they ended up having their cash out from the Kickstarter at the end of the year, which means he had no expenses, so he had to pay tax on all that money. Then he wanted to film in LA to be with his childhood buddy he agreed to film a movie with. When it went out to LA, they couldn't find a good place to film the movie as far as like, rental fees for all these facilities was through the roof. They had to go by all the rules of LA as far as like the daytime hours to film or how many the Screen Guild Actors Union or whatever, as far as like how many hours they can work in a day. And everything that could go wrong with the movie seemed to go wrong with the movie. And they eventually ran out of money and the movie wasn't even finished. Had to go back to the East Coast over here. And when he got over here on the East Coast, he had to basically go through all of the extra footage, re-edit it, film a few other things, work through all the special effects. And I mean, he had basically several more years to work on the movie, even after the movie was filmed. And that put a lot of stress on him because everyone was saying, like, where's the movie? Where's the movie? And he was desperately trying to work on the movie, but it was just so much that was falling on him. And at the same time, his wife, he agreed to start a family with her, and he knew that was her personal dream. She had followed his dream to be a director, make his own movie. It was his time to help her follow her dream to be a mother and have a family with him. And it does talk about like he wasn't just doing it out of like, hey, a contractual agreement or whatnot. He wanted the family. It talks about like when he was at the amusement park, when he realized like, hey, I truly do want kids. So he is involved in this dream with her. And they do have their first kid. And it was a very difficult birthing process. I mean, the child, it almost killed his wife April and the child in the process, and the child came out with a paralyzed arm, and they had to go through all these medical appointments for both April and the child, and it was a huge toll that it would take on a family going through all of this, much less him trying to keep up with the normal AVGN episodes and working on the movie, and people breathing down his back saying, hey, where's the movie, where's the movie? And this is a man who was under a horrendous amount of stress, and I would not wish that on anybody. The amount of stress he's going through at this moment, it's unimaginable. And I know a lot of people at this time period, this is when the people started to sort of turn against James, as in like they would, nose things on film. I remember there was a instance where everybody talked about like how James like had to get off the stream immediately and was like freaking out, and everybody sort of made fun of him and like pointed out like, here's a man who's like whipped by his wife, and he has to get off the camera immediately, and they made a lot of fun of him. They wondered about his marriage and all this other stuff. But it's like this guy is going through so much behind the cameras. We had no idea what James was enduring when it comes to like family hardships and just trying to keep up with a business and trying to keep up with his finances. And it really just sort of makes you just take a step back and realize like, everyone was judging him so harshly, but James was going through a lot, and he was a real person, and this was a really difficult time for him. And the movie does finally come out, and he's very proud of the movie. He's excited about it, and he just sort of pats himself on the back a little bit in the book about it. But I can't blame him. I mean, he went through all of this to get the movie done, and it just really shows a guy who has fought against odds almost his entire life to finally have things come out and made a full movie on his own. And honestly, I think it's awesome. I mean, he truly was an underdog in so many areas, and truly like represents like the socially awkward or the nerdy character in all of us who finally achieve their lifelong dream. And even though I'm not a huge fan of the movie, I love that the movie was made because of what it did for James. And the movie part of the book takes up another solid probably third of the book. I mean, it's a huge portion of the book. I mean, he breaks down every single disaster that took place, like the weather or the money or the poor hiring decisions. I mean, everything is documented very well inside the book. And it really, I think it was almost like therapy for him to write the book, because it really just sort of pours out like all the struggles he was going through, gets it on paper, And I think that's important for him. But the book doesn't stop after the movie. It does continue on. It talks about, his pursuits with Rex Viper. It talks about, continue making AVGN episodes. It talks about how he wants to make another film one day. But he also talks about how that's going to probably happen after his kids are grown, because he realizes like that's his passion now. And I think that people don't realize that, or they don't acknowledge that James is probably doing AVGN now. It's probably more like a job. Yes, he enjoys it. Yes, he still enjoys making films. He likes the characters of the nerd. But would he rather be making other films? Definitely. Would he rather just simply be a dad right now and help raise his kids and help them to basically pursue their dreams? Definitely. I think James looks at his own personal life and he looks back over it and he sees all the things that made him who he is, and he wants to do the same thing for his kids as far as like helping them to pursue their imagination, their dreams, everything that they want. And I think James is probably a great father. I mean, he sounds like he's truly there for his kids. And I think James would love to make another movie, but that's going to come after his family. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's admirable because James is still pursuing filmmaking. He's still going to do what he wants to do. He's still going to end up making another movie one day. I truly feel like he will after his kids are grown. But I feel like James knows where he's at in life. He knows his priorities. And I think that's awesome. But overall, his autobiography, A Movie Making Nerd, is a really enjoyable book. It's very relatable. It's a very fast read. And I think if you're a fan of like James in general, as far as like knowing him as a person or just enjoying his videos where he talks to you, I think you'll love the book. If you're a fan of just simply his character, the nerd, the book might not be as enjoyable for you because it doesn't go into a lot of details about like how he creates certain videos or his gaming history. I don't think James is a big gamer. He's just simply a filmmaker, and this is his personal journey to essentially achieving his dreams. And his dreams have sort of changed over time. They've been molded a little bit. And part of his dream now is to raise his family and then get back into filmmaking. And I just think it's a really enjoyable read. And I think if you enjoy James's material on his Cinemassacre YouTube channel, I think you'll really enjoy the book. But if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check out my other videos listed up above. And as always, go out there, find a great game to play. Just simply have a great rest of the day.